89 AD. The crowd is still screaming. Blood is still wet on the sand. A gladiator stands victorious as the emperor applauds. And then Rome gives him his reward. Not gold, not freedom. A woman, chained, terrified, dragged beneath the arena into chambers built for this exact purpose. What happened next was not hidden. It was written down by Rome's own historians, by poets who watched it happen. This wasn't madness. It was policy, a system so normalized that no one questioned it. Not the crowd, not the officials, not even the philosophers who felt themselves growing crueler just by witnessing it. This is the part of Roman history that movies erase. The truth that lived underground, beneath the applause. The arena of Capua, 89 AD. The roar of 50,000 voices crashes like thunder against stone. A gladiator stands alone in the sand, chest heaving, muscles slick with sweat and blood. 3 opponents lie dead at his feet. The emperor rises. The crowd erupts. This is the moment every fighter dreams of. Survival, victory, applause. And then comes the reward. It isn't announced from the stands. There is no ceremony, no speech. The gladiator is led away from the sunlight, down stone stairs slick from years of blood and water, into the hypogeum beneath the arena. Torches flicker. The noise above fades into a distant rumble. This is where Rome keeps what it doesn't want to see. Here, rewards are chosen. A woman waits in chains. A Dacian prisoner, captured during conquest, stripped of name, status, and protection. She has already watched men die for sport. Now she learns what victory means in Rome. This isn't a crime. It isn't an exception. It is tradition. A legal right granted to a victorious fighter. The Romans had a name for it. Victoria carnalis. Carnal victory. This wasn't whispered rumor or later invention. Rome documented it openly. Juvenal mocked it in his satires. Suetonius recorded it in imperial biographies. Martial described it in verse without softening a single detail. The same civilization that built aqueducts and codified law also turned conquered women into trophies, handed out alongside wine and money. Hollywood shows you honor and heroism. It shows the fight, the sword, the final blow. What it doesn't show you is what happened after the applause ended. After the crowd went home. After the sand was raked smooth again. That silence is where the truth lived. Gladiators were not free men. They were slaves, criminals, prisoners of war. Under Roman law, they were legally incomplete persons. Property trained to kill for entertainment. If they survived long enough to become popular, Rome rewarded them without spending gold. The editor, the official who organized the games, would offer choices. Purse of coins, a jug of wine, a clean bed for one night, or Victoria carnalis. Tacitus mentions it in passing, as if it needs no explanation. Cassius Dio records it without outrage. Suetonius lists it the way he lists distributions of grain. Matter of fact, administrative. To Rome, this wasn't perversion. It was efficiency. The women came from everywhere Rome conquered. Dacia, Gaul, Germania, Britannia, captured during campaigns, transported across the empire, catalogued like supplies. They were not prostitutes. They were not volunteers. They were human spoils of war, property of the Roman state. Handing them over as rewards cost the treasury nothing. This served more than one purpose. First, it motivated gladiators to fight harder without increasing expenses. Second, it sent a message to conquered peoples that went far beyond military defeat. Your men will die in our arenas. Your women will be used as rewards. Resistance doesn't just fail. It humiliates. Seneca attended these games. He wasn't a soldier or a butcher. He was a philosopher. And even he admitted what the spectacle did to him. He wrote that after watching, he returned home more greedy, more cruel, more inhuman. Rome had turned brutality into routine, horror into paperwork, violence into entertainment so normalized that even those disturbed by it felt powerless to object. Everything was written down. Ledgers, tablets, records, names reduced to origins and approximate ages. Human beings processed like inventory. And this was only the system. To understand the full reality, you have to follow the gladiator deeper underground, into the chambers built not for combat, but for what came after victory. Beneath the arena floor stretched a maze of stone corridors and locked rooms. The hypogeum was not an afterthought. It was engineered with the same precision as the seating above. Elevators for animals, pens for condemned prisoners, and smaller chambers, hidden from the crowd, reserved for rewards. Rome preferred not to advertise too loudly. After a victorious bout, the master of games descended into this underground world. According to Suetonius, the gladiator was presented with a tablet listing his options. If he chose Victoria Carnalis, the process began immediately. Martial describes fighters being led past holding cells where female captives were kept. Some still wore the torn remnants of clothing from their capture. Others had been washed by attendants, their hair combed, their bodies prepared, not for dignity, but for presentation. The gladiator did not speak. He pointed. Guards unlocked chains. A woman was removed from the cell and escorted down a narrow passageway to what Roman records coldly called reward chambers. Archaeology confirms their existence. Small rooms, stone benches, iron rings embedded into the walls, doors designed to lock from the outside. These spaces were purpose-built, as intentional as the tunnels for lions or the lifts that carried fighters into the sun. Juvenal mocked this practice in his sixth satire, but in doing so, he confirmed how routine it was. He describes women allocated to blood-soaked champions the same way wine or money might be distributed. There is no shock in his tone, only bitterness. This was how Rome worked. Nothing about the process was random. Clerks recorded each transaction in official ledgers. Origin, approximate age, duration. One Dacian woman, roughly 20 years old, transferred to a gladiator as a carnal reward. Returned by morning. Human lives reduced to inventory lines. Suffering logged and filed. But this was not only about rewarding fighters. It was psychological warfare. Tacitus explains Rome's strategy with conquered peoples. Victory wasn't complete until resistance was broken. Armies could be defeated. Cities could be burned. But spirit lingered. To crush it, Rome targeted what communities valued most. Their women, their daughters, their priestesses, the people men believed they were fighting to protect. Cassius Dio describes what happened after Trajan's conquest of Dacia in 106 AD. Thousands of prisoners were brought to Rome. Among them were women from the tribal elite, daughters of chieftains, wives of warriors. They were deliberately used as gladiatorial rewards during the victory celebrations. When Trajan staged 123 days of games, the message was unmistakable. Resistance leads here. The crowd understood it. So did Rome's enemies. This system expanded whenever conquest supplied a surplus. Suetonius notes that after major campaigns, arena managers used captive women as cost-free incentives. When wars slowed, the rewards changed. More coins, more wine. Cassius Dio even mentions shortages during years without conquest, when fewer prisoners were available. The empire's entertainment machine depended on a steady flow of conquered bodies. The organization was chilling. Arena administrators tracked supplies with obsessive detail. Procurators coordinated with military commanders. Women captured on distant battlefields were transported across provinces, processed through camps, cataloged, and eventually delivered to holding cells beneath amphitheaters. Gaul, Germania, Britannia, Dacia. Each campaign fed the system. Tacitus mentions attendants assigned to maintain the chambers. Cleaning, lighting torches, ensuring the doors worked properly. Guards were posted outside, not to protect the women, but to ensure exclusivity. The reward belonged to the designated gladiator alone. A fragmentary tablet found near Pompeii spells it out with bureaucratic precision. Granted to a gladiator for meritorious victory. Choice of captive. Duration limited. To be returned by dawn. Like borrowed equipment. Human suffering processed with the efficiency of a grain shipment. And above all of it, the crowd went home believing justice had been served. The system demanded more than gladiators and captives. It demanded complicity. Rome's citizens watched in silence. Fathers brought their sons. Mothers brought daughters. Philosophers, senators, ordinary men and women. None objected openly. To do so meant risking one's dignities, social honor, and ultimately survival. To speak against the arena was to question Rome itself, and questioning Rome was dangerous. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, described returning from the games a changed man, hardened and cruel, yet powerless to act. Even he understood the mechanism. Horror normalized through repetition, brutality codified into law, silence rewarded as survival. Every spectator, from noble to commoner, learned that complicity was a requirement. To watch was to participate, even if unwillingly. This culture of normalized cruelty persisted across centuries. Tacitus records incidents during the reigns of Tiberius and Claudius, when citizens attempting to leave the arena faced punishment, or worse, death. Silence was mandatory. Participation came in many forms: cheering, observing, or simply not objecting. In each instance, the system reinforced itself, teaching that compliance was safer than conscience. And yet, even within this machinery, cracks appeared. History records moments when Rome's own citizens recognized a line had been crossed. Under Emperor Commodus, the practice extended beyond captured foreigners to the daughters of political enemies, Roman citizens. Quintus Pomponius tried to protect his daughter. He was killed. She was taken. It wasn't morality that drove outrage. It was self-preservation. Even Rome's elite understood that their own were not immune. Nero provides another example. After the Great Fire of 64 AD, Christian women were executed publicly, subjected to violations before death. Some in the crowd began leaving quietly. Not in protest, they feared the emperor, but as a silent acknowledgement that even Rome could go too far. Still, the spectacles continued, another 200 years of normalization. The historians who recorded these acts offer a fascinating lens. Suetonius notes the practices without judgment, equating them to grain distributions. Martial satirized the hypocrisy of Romans who celebrated suffering while claiming civilization. Tacitus edged closest to moral critique, writing that Nero's punishments exceeded justice but never condemning Rome outright. Juvenal wielded satire as a weapon, exposing moral decay without offering solutions. Even Seneca, who confessed personal corruption after observing the games, could only describe horror, not stop it. This was the essence of Rome's power, not only in conquest, but in its ability to systematize cruelty, bureaucratize suffering, and normalize horror. Women reduced to inventory, violence organized and maintained, citizens complicit by fear, philosophers bearing witness without action, gladiators seizing fleeting moments of power over lives not their own. The empire became a machine, turning humanity into mechanism. And when emperors overstepped, when the line between foreign captives and citizens blurred, the consequences were swift and deadly. Commodus was assassinated because he violated even Rome's perverse sense of order. Yet the system itself endured. The apparatus outlived the men who wielded it, the historians who recorded it, and the citizens who watched silently. Rome's arenas may be empty now, the blood long soaked into sand, but the lesson remains. Power, unchecked and codified, creates normalcy out of horror. Bureaucracy can make cruelty invisible. Entire societies can participate in evil while convincing themselves they are innocent. This is the true legacy of Victoria Carnalis. A civilization that turned suffering into entertainment, routine into policy, and complicity into survival. By the 5th century, the arenas finally fell silent. Gladiators were gone. Emperors were gone. Citizens who cheered, feared, or stayed silent had all vanished. What remained were ruins, stones etched with stories that no Hollywood epic would dare depict. The Colosseum still stands, a monument not just to conquest, but to the normalization of cruelty. Beneath its sand, in hidden chambers and corridors, history whispers a warning. When systems institutionalize suffering, it becomes invisible, routine, and unstoppable. The Roman state mastered what Hannah Arendt centuries later called the banality of evil. human suffering processed like grain shipments, citizens witnessing atrocities without objecting, intellectuals recording horrors without demanding change. Evil became ordinary, and once ordinary, it became invisible. Romans did not perceive themselves as monsters. They saw themselves as patriots enjoying spectacle. Gladiators did not see themselves as abusers. They were men seizing brief, sanctioned power. Historians did not see themselves as complicit. They were chroniclers of culture. 400,000 lives vanished in arenas over 4 centuries. The lesson is not merely that Rome was brutal, but that systems can normalize atrocity. Bureaucracy can cloak horror in administration. Complicity can masquerade as civility. Power without limits corrupts not just individuals, but entire societies. As Martial wrote in one of his darker epigrams, Rome didn't fall because it was weak. It fell because it forgot what strength without cruelty looked like. The amphitheaters are empty now. Tourists snap pictures, guided by tales of heroism and glory. Yet beneath that sand, history hides a darker truth. Women, once treated as spoils, remind us that civilization can invent efficiency in suffering. Silence, once survival, becomes participation, and the empire that conquered the world could not conquer its own darkness. This is the real story of Victoria Carnalis, the bureaucratic machinery of cruelty, and the human lives consumed by the spectacle of power. Rome offers a lesson for every era. When suffering is systematized, horror becomes ordinary, complicity invisible, and even the greatest thinkers powerless to intervene. The Colosseum may stand, but its shadow reminds us that civilization without conscience is a machine for cruelty, and the true cost of empire is measured not in victories, but in human souls.